Across the endless silence of space, where empires rise and fall without warning, a quiet realization was spreading among alien commanders. Humans were a mistake. Not a mistake of creation, but a mistake of judgment. For decades, they had been dismissed as cooperative, predictable, even harmless. A species more interested in building than conquering. A civilization that offered help without demanding tribute. That shared knowledge without claiming dominance. A useful species. A manageable one. That's what the galaxy believed. Until the day humanity stopped. No warnings. No threats. No final negotiations. They simply stepped back. And in that moment, something shifted. Because the galaxy had never truly asked a dangerous question. What happens when the species holding everything together decides to let go? By the time they understood the answer, it was already too late. At the center of known space, where trade routes converged and diplomacy replaced war, stood the Council Nexus, a vast orbital structure built not by one species, but by many. It was a symbol of unity, or at least the illusion of it. Thousands of ships arrived and departed every cycle, carrying diplomats, merchants, scientists, and soldiers from over 100 civilizations. Languages overlapped. Cultures collided. Agreements were signed, broken, and rewritten. And among them, humans moved quietly. They weren't the strongest. They weren't the oldest. They weren't even the most advanced. But they were everywhere. Human engineers maintained environmental systems across half the station. Human doctors ran free clinics in sectors others had abandoned. Human cargo fleets connected distant colonies that no one else considered profitable. If something broke, humans fixed it. If someone needed help, humans showed up. No conditions. No demands. No visible gain. Most species didn't question it. They assumed it was strategy. After all, no civilization gives that much without expecting something in return. In the Grand Council chamber, that assumption had quietly turned into concern. 37% of interstellar medical distribution, one analyst reported. 42% of infrastructure maintenance contracts. Over 60% of educational exchange programs. The numbers echoed through the chamber like a warning. To some, it sounded like generosity. To others, it sounded like control. They're embedding themselves into every critical system, one delegate argued. Soft influence today, total dependence tomorrow. Heads nodded, not in anger, in caution, because history had taught the galaxy one lesson above all. No power rises without a reason, and no species helps this much without a plan. Only a few remained silent. The ones who had worked alongside humans long enough to notice something unsettling. There was no hidden agenda, no leverage, no demands behind the kindness, just consistency. And somehow, that was even more disturbing. The vote was scheduled without announcement. No public debate, no extended deliberation, just a closed session of the Grand Council, restricted access, high priority, which meant one thing. The decision had already been made. Ambassador Elias Varn stood alone at the edge of the chamber floor, hands folded behind his back, posture steady, expression unreadable. He had been through negotiations before. Trade disputes, border conflicts, even the occasional threat of war. But this felt different. Quieter, colder. Around him, the chamber pulsed with low light as representatives from dozens of species took their positions. Massive, scaled figures. Thin, luminous forms. Mechanical entities humming with internal logic. All watching. None speaking to him. That was the first sign. A tall, silver-skinned delegate rose from the central platform. The Council will now proceed with Resolution 9912. No introduction. No explanation. Just the number. A projection ignited above them, text forming in sharp, sterile lines. Human expansion into new sectors will require multi-council approval. All human-operated infrastructure will undergo external oversight. Independent human aid programs will be regulated under council authority. Trade activities will be limited to prevent economic imbalance. A pause. Then the final line. Immediate compliance required. Silence filled the chamber. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses down on your chest. Elias read it once. Then again. Slowly. Carefully. As if the meaning might change. It didn't. So that's it, he said quietly. Not into a microphone. Not for the chamber. Just out loud. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Most didn't react at all. The vote will now begin. Lights flickered across the chamber. One by one, the votes appeared. Blue, blue, blue. Approval. Species that had relied on human medical support for decades. Blue. Species whose infrastructure was maintained almost entirely by human engineers. Blue. Species whose economies were stabilized by human trade routes. Blue. No hesitation. No debate. No acknowledgement. Just numbers. Cold. Efficient. Final. A single red light appeared. Then another. One abstention. And that was it. Resolution 99-12 passes. No applause. No celebration. Just quiet acceptance. As if something inevitable had finally been completed. All eyes turned to Elias. Waiting. Expecting anger. Resistance. An argument. Something. Because that's what powerful species did. They pushed back. They threatened. They made sure decisions like this came with consequences. Elias Varn did none of those things. He stepped forward. Calm. Measured. Controlled. Humanity acknowledges the council's decision. A pause. No emotion in his voice. We will begin withdrawal procedures immediately. That was it. No protest. No negotiation. No warning. For a brief moment, something flickered across the chamber. Confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. One of the delegates leaned forward. That's all, they asked. No objection? Elias met their gaze. For just a second, the mask slipped. Not anger. Not fear. Something worse. Disappointment. You've made your position clear, he said. So will we. He turned and walked out. No guards followed him. No one tried to stop him. Behind him, the chamber remained silent. But the silence had changed. It was heavier now, because deep down, even those who voted in favor felt it. Not victory, but the faint, creeping sense that something irreversible had just begun. And no one truly understood what they had just set in motion. The first sign wasn't loud. There were no alarms. No emergency broadcasts. No fleet mobilizations. Just absence. At docking ring 7, a cargo supervisor frowned at his display. Human transport schedules, are they delayed? His assistant checked. Then checked again. No, sir. A pause. They've been canceled. Across the station, similar reports began to surface. Human maintenance crews gone. Medical staff transferred. Logistics teams offline. Not abruptly. Not chaotically. Systematically. Inside the human embassy, the walls were already bare. Where once hundreds of certifications, agreements, and shared achievements had been displayed, there was nothing left but clean metal and faint outlines where history used to hang. Ambassador Elias Varn sealed a container with a quiet click. No rush. No hesitation. Every movement precise. Intentional. Final data transfers complete, an aide reported. All shared systems have been documented and handed over. Elias nodded once. Open access? Yes, sir. No restrictions. Of course. No restrictions. Even now, they weren't taking anything back. Outside, the first human ships began to depart. Not warships. Not escorts. Freighters. Medical carriers. Transport vessels. They moved in perfect formation, slipping away from the station like a tide reversing. No urgency. No panic. Just leaving. From the observation deck, a cluster of alien delegates watched in silence. They're actually doing it, one whispered. Of course they are, another replied. They said they would. Still, something felt wrong. This is a bluff, a third insisted. A pressure tactic. They'll return once negotiations reopen. But no negotiations came. Hours passed, then days. And the humans didn't stop. Entire sectors began to feel it. Environmental systems started running slightly less efficiently. Nothing critical, just slower responses. Longer calibration times. In the medical wing, a doctor scanned her supply logs. Why is the restock delayed? Her assistant hesitated. The supplier was human. And they've closed operations. A pause. That's fine, she said quickly. We'll source alternatives. Of course they would. The galaxy was vast. Resources were everywhere, weren't they? Meanwhile, at the outer docks, the scale of the departure became impossible to ignore. Hundreds of human vessels, then thousands, all leaving. Ambassador Fell, one of the few who had abstained from the vote, watched from a private viewport. His translator hummed softly as he spoke. They are not posturing. His aide shifted uneasily. Then what are they doing? Fell's gaze remained fixed on the departing fleet. They are complying. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because compliance implied acceptance, and acceptance implied finality. They'll come back, the aide said, more to himself than anyone else. They always do. They're helpful. Fell didn't answer immediately. He had lived long enough to recognize patterns. And this was not one of them. No, he said finally. They won't. Back inside the council chamber, reports continued to come in. Human contracts terminated. Human subsidies ended. Human personnel withdrawn. All within schedule. All exactly as stated. No delays. No exceptions. They're making a point, one council member argued. Good, another replied. Let them. The system will stabilize. Because that's what systems did. They adapted. They corrected. They moved on. Didn't they? Elias Varn stood on the command deck of the final departing vessel. Below him, the council nexus rotated slowly, still bright, still functioning, still unaware. Departure window confirmed. The pilot reported. All remaining assets accounted for. Elias took one last look. At the station. At the place where humanity had spent decades building connections, solving problems, supporting systems no one else wanted to manage. No anger. No regret. Just quiet understanding. Execute. The ship turned, joined the formation, and began to drift away. Behind them, the lights of the station continued to shine. Unchanged. Stable. Complete. At least, for now. The final human vessel exited council-controlled space exactly 72 hours after the vote. No delays. No stragglers. No one left behind. And then, for the first time in decades, there were no human signals anywhere in the network. No background traffic. No routine updates. No quiet corrections happening behind the scenes. Nothing. At first, no one noticed. Then, someone did. A minor systems alert. Dismissed. A delayed shipment. Ignored. A missed maintenance cycle. Logged for later. Small things. Insignificant things. But they kept happening. And slowly, the galaxy began to feel something it hadn't felt in a very long time. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. Uncertainty. Because for the first time, the systems that had always just worked were now being handled by those who didn't fully understand them. And far beyond council space, human ships continued their journey home. Silent. Not in retreat, but in decision. At first, it was easy to ignore. A delayed shipment here. A postponed maintenance cycle there. Nothing critical. Nothing urgent. The systems still worked. Mostly. In Sector 12, environmental controls fluctuated by less than 1%. Barely noticeable. Logged. Scheduled. Deferred. In the medical wing, a shipment of broad-spectrum antibiotics arrived 3 days late. Unusual, but not alarming. We'll adjust, the attending physician said, already moving on to her next patient. Because delays happened, even in advanced systems. That's what everyone told themselves. Until the delays started stacking. 3 days became 5. 5 became 10. And then, there were no shipments at all. Status update, the physician asked, her tone sharper now. The assistant hesitated, scrolling through overlapping data streams. The previous supplier has not resumed operations. Then source another. We tried. A pause. The next available provider is charging 4 times the standard rate, and their delivery window is 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The doctor looked back at her patient list, then at the screen, then back again. That's not acceptable. But the system didn't care what was acceptable. Across the station, similar conversations were happening. In engineering, we've run the diagnostics 3 times. And we don't know why the system is compensating like this. It shouldn't be. I know. In logistics, why are the outer trade routes inactive? They're no longer profitable. They were never profitable. Exactly. In education, why have the exchange program stopped? Funding has been withdrawn. By who? Humans. Each issue, on its own, manageable, but together, they began to form a pattern. A quiet, creeping realization. Things weren't breaking. They were unraveling. Counselor Nerith sat in her office, surrounded by data streams. At first, she had dismissed the reports. Temporary disruptions. Market adjustments. Expected fluctuations after a major policy shift. That's what the projections had said. But projections didn't match reality. Pull up infrastructure maintenance logs, she ordered. Her assistant complied. The numbers appeared. Completion rates dropping. Response times increasing. System errors multiplying. Why wasn't this flagged earlier? It was, the assistant replied carefully. But the deviations were within acceptable thresholds. Of course they were, because whoever designed those thresholds had assumed something, that someone would always be there to correct the drift. Nerith leaned back slowly. Compare current performance to historical averages. The system processed, then displayed the result. A sharp decline, not catastrophic, not yet, but undeniable. Go deeper, she said. I want source-level analysis. Who maintained these systems before? The assistant hesitated, then answered. Humans. The word lingered in the air. Of course they did, Nerith murmured. In the outer sectors, the effects were already worse. Much worse. A small colony station reported partial life support failure. Not total collapse. Just reduced efficiency. Enough to cause discomfort. Then illness. Emergency teams were dispatched, but they arrived late because the fastest route was no longer active. On another world, agricultural output dropped by 12%. No clear cause. No obvious failure. Just less. Less yield. Less stability. Less margin for error. Compensate, the local governor ordered. But compensation required resources. And resources required trade. And trade was slowing. Back at the council nexus, the first real argument broke out. This is a temporary adjustment period, one delegate insisted. Then why is everything getting worse? Another shot back. Because systems need time to stabilize. They've had time. It's been weeks. Weeks. That was the problem. It had only been weeks. And already, things were slipping. Ambassador Fell stood silently at the edge of the chamber, listening, watching. He had seen collapses before. Civilizations that thought they were stable, right up until they weren't. They built redundancy into the system, one analyst argued. Multiple suppliers, overlapping infrastructure, distributed control. Yes, Fell said quietly. And who maintained that redundancy? No one answered, because everyone knew. They just hadn't wanted to say it. Meanwhile, in the medical wing, the first patient died waiting for treatment. Not because the cure didn't exist, but because it wasn't available. Not anymore. The doctor stood over the empty bed, her hands still, her mind replaying the same thought. We had this. We always had this. So why? Why didn't we anymore? She turned to her assistant. Find me every supplier, every option, every possible alternative. The assistant didn't move. There aren't any. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Because for the first time, the truth began to surface. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. The systems hadn't been self-sustaining. They had been supported, quietly, consistently, by a species that never asked for recognition, and never warned what would happen if they stopped. Across the galaxy, the same realization was beginning to form.
Too slow to stop it.
Too early to understand it, but growing, like a crack spreading through glass. And no one yet realized just how far it would go. By the time the first emergency session was called, it was already too late for denial. The chamber felt different now. Not confident, not controlled, uneasy. Data streams filled the air, projections layered over projections, each one telling a slightly worse story than the last. Supply chains fractured, medical networks unstable, infrastructure degrading. But none of it made sense. Not completely. These numbers are inconsistent, one analyst said. The systems shouldn't be failing at this rate.
They aren't failing, another replied.
They're underperforming. That's not better. At the center of it all stood Counselor Nereth.
Silent.
Focused. For the past 17 days, she hadn't left her office, hadn't slept properly, hadn't stopped digging, because something about the data didn't add up. Bring up cross-sector dependency models, she ordered. The system complied. A web of connections filled the chamber. Trade routes, medical supply chains, energy distribution, educational networks, all linked, all interdependent. That part wasn't surprising. What was surprising was what happened when she removed one variable. Isolate human involvement, she said. The system paused. Processing. Then, the entire model shifted. Lines disappeared. Connections collapsed. Whole sections of the network dimmed or vanished entirely. A murmur spread through the chamber. That can't be right. Run it again. It ran again. Same result. Nereth stepped forward. Her voice steady, controlled. Humans were not participants in this system. A pause. They were the system. Silence. Not confusion this time. Understanding. And it was worse. Display sector breakdown, she continued. The data appeared.
Cold.
Precise. Unforgiving. Medical infrastructure. She gestured. 73% of active development funded by human institutions. A ripple moved through the chamber. 81% of training programs staffed by human instructors. More shifting. More unease. 92% of emergency response logistics coordinated through human networks.
Now,
no one moved, because the numbers weren't just high. They were overwhelming. Expand to economic systems, someone demanded. Nereth didn't hesitate. Outer trade routes. She brought them up. Maintained at consistent financial loss by human carriers. A delegate leaned forward. That's not possible. No species operates like that. Nereth met their gaze. They did. She moved to the next dataset. Educational exchange programs, 60% human-funded. Cultural preservation grants, majority human-sponsored. Disaster relief reserves, almost entirely human-supplied. Each number landed harder than the last, because each one revealed the same truth. Not partial support. Not shared responsibility. Dependence. Total. Summarized financial impact, a voice said quietly. Nereth paused, just for a second. Then she pulled up the final dataset. This is the total annual expenditure by human systems within Council space. The number appeared. 4.7 trillion credits. A few gasps. And total direct revenue? She didn't look away. 400 billion. Silence. Absolute. Because everyone understood what that meant. They were operating at a loss, someone whispered. Not a loss, Nereth corrected softly. A deficit. A massive one. Every year. For decades. No hidden profit streams. No backdoor advantages. No long-term extraction strategy. Just giving. They controlled us. One delegate said weakly. Nereth shook her head. No. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't harden. If anything, it became quieter. They carried us. That was worse. Because control could be resisted. Manipulation could be exposed. But this meant the foundation they had trusted was never theirs. A system alarm cut through the chamber. Sector 14 environmental instability detected. Life support degradation in adjacent zones. No one reacted immediately. Not because it wasn't serious, but because, for the first time, they understood why. "Deploy maintenance teams," someone ordered. "They're already deployed," the system replied. "And they don't know how to fix it." Another silence, heavier than before, because now, the pattern was complete. Every system they thought they owned, every structure they believed they controlled, every safety net they assumed would hold, had been built, maintained, and quietly sustained by humans. And the humans
were gone.
Nerith looked around the chamber, at the faces, at the realizations settling in. And for the first time since the vote, she spoke without restraint. "We didn't limit them." A pause. "We removed them." No one argued, because no one could. And outside the chamber, across stations, colonies, and entire systems, the consequences of that truth were only just beginning. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything broke. No grand collapse. No dramatic end. Just
failure. Slow.
Relentless. Unstoppable. The first systems to go were the ones no one noticed. Environmental controls dropped below optimal levels. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to strain biological systems. Respiratory illnesses increased. Fatigue spread. Productivity declined. No one connected it. Not yet. Then came the infrastructure delays. A damaged power conduit in Sector 9 took 3 times longer to repair. Not because the tools were missing, not because the engineers were untrained, but because the system was more complex than documented. "Why isn't this in the schematics?" one engineer demanded. "It should be."
It was.
Just not completely, because over time, adjustments had been made. Optimizations, shortcuts, stabilizers, not recorded, because the ones who implemented them had always been there to maintain them. Until now, the power grid failed for 17 minutes. 17 minutes. In a station that had not experienced a full blackout in over a century. 17 minutes was enough. Hospitals lost critical support. Transport systems halted mid-cycle. Security networks flickered offline. 17 minutes changed everything, because it proved something no one wanted to admit. The system wasn't stable. It had been stabilized. And that stability
was gone.
Across council space, similar failures began to emerge. Trade networks fractured. Routes once considered essential were quietly abandoned. "They're not profitable," shipping guilds reported. "They were never profitable," officials replied. "Yes," the guild answered. "And now no one is covering the loss." Outer colonies were the first to feel it. Supply shipments slowed, then stopped. Food shortages followed. Not immediately, but inevitably, because those routes had only existed for one reason: humans. In the medical sector, the situation turned critical. Diseases once considered manageable became deadly again, not because cures didn't exist, but because access did not. "We have the formula," one researcher argued desperately. "Then produce it." "We are trying." The lab results hovered in the air. Yield, 6%. Time to viable dose, 5 months. Patient survival window, 3 weeks. Silence. Because knowledge was not the same as capability. And capability was not something that could be rebuilt overnight. Back in the council chamber, the arguments had stopped. Not because anyone agreed, but because reality had made the debate irrelevant. "We need emergency measures." With what resources? We'll reallocate. From where? Every solution led to the same problem. There was no excess, because the excess had never belonged to them. It had been provided freely, and now it was gone. Then, the first conflict began. A minor dispute, a border disagreement between 2 neighboring species. It should have been simple, negotiated, contained. It wasn't. Without human mediators, there was no neutral ground, no trusted voice, no one both sides were willing to listen to. Talks failed. Then, shots were fired. Not many, at first. Just enough to cross a line. And once that line was crossed, it didn't stop. Within days, The conflict escalated. Fleet movements, blockades, retaliation strikes. Old tensions resurfaced. Grievances long buried now had space to grow. And they grew fast, because for decades, peace hadn't just been maintained. It had been managed.
Carefully. Constantly.
By a species that was no longer there. The Council issued statements, called for ceasefires, demanded restraint. No one listened, because authority, without power, is just noise. Within weeks, 3 more conflicts ignited, then 5, then too many to track in real time. War didn't spread like fire. It spread like pressure release.
Sudden.
Explosive. Inevitable. Station Nexus, once the symbol of unity, began to fail. Not catastrophically, just steadily. Life support dropped to 80% efficiency. Communications lag increased. Systems desynchronized. Nothing fatal, just
worse.
Every day, evacuation protocols were discussed, then delayed, then reconsidered, because no one wanted to admit it. The station was dying, and no one knew how to save it. Counselor Nerith stood in the observation chamber, staring out at the fractured traffic patterns beyond. Ships no longer moved in harmony, no longer followed predictable flows. Everything felt disconnected. They held this together, she said quietly. No one asked who. They all knew. Behind her, a new report came in. 18 colony worlds reporting critical shortages. 4 billion individuals at risk. The room went still. Relief efforts?
A pause.
There are none. Not organized. Not coordinated. Not effective. Because the system that had handled relief
was gone.
And, for the first time, the full weight of the situation became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a disruption. This wasn't a downturn. This wasn't something that would stabilize with time. This was collapse. Real. Uncontrolled. Irreversible. Without intervention. And the one species capable of that intervention was no longer part of the system. Far beyond Council space, humanity watched, not in triumph, not in satisfaction, but in silence, because they had already made their choice. And now, the galaxy had to live with its own. But even as systems failed, as wars spread, as billions stood on the edge, a question began to rise. Quiet at first, then louder, then impossible to ignore. Not asked in council chambers, not debated in official channels, but whispered, across stations, across ships, across worlds. The same question, over and over again. What have we done? And more importantly, can it be undone? The first human ship returned quietly. No announcement, no diplomatic message, no negotiation request. It didn't dock at the Council Nexus. It didn't request permission. It simply arrived in orbit above a dying world. The colony had been failing for weeks. Food supplies depleted, medical systems collapsing, infrastructure barely holding. No official aid had come, because no official aid system existed anymore. When the ship appeared on long-range scanners, panic spread instantly. Unknown vessel approaching, trajectory locked. Identify. The scan completed. Human. Silence. Confusion. Are they here to negotiate? No communication request detected. Then what are they doing? The answer came minutes later. Cargo doors opened, dropships deployed, and supplies began to fall from orbit.
Food.
Medicine. Water purification systems. Portable infrastructure units. No conditions attached. No contracts. No oversight. Just help. On the ground, stunned officials watched as human teams moved with practiced efficiency. They didn't ask for authority, didn't request permission, didn't wait for approval. They saw a problem and started fixing it. A local commander approached one of them. Under what agreement are you operating? The human didn't stop working. No agreement. Then what do you want in return? The human glanced up briefly. Nothing. And went back to work. The commander stood there, unable to process the answer, because in his entire life, nothing had ever been free. Across the colony, similar scenes unfolded. A human medic treated patients from 3 different species without hesitation. No priority system. No political consideration. A human engineer repaired a failing generator, then stayed to teach the local crew how to maintain it. Not for payment. Not for leverage. Just because it needed to be done. News of the intervention spread fast. Too fast. Within hours, other worlds began sending signals. Requests.
Please.
Desperate messages. And one by one, human ships answered. Not as fleets. Not as armies. But as aid. Medical carriers arrived at plague-stricken systems. Transport ships evacuated endangered populations. Engineering vessels stabilized failing infrastructure. Everywhere, the same pattern. No demands. No control. No attempt to re-establish authority. Just help. Back in the fractured council space, the reaction was divided. They're exploiting the situation, one official argued. This is a strategic move to regain influence. Then where are the conditions? Another shot back. Where are the contracts? The restrictions? There were none. And that was the problem, because strategy made sense. Power plays made sense. Control made sense. But this didn't. Counselor Nerith watched the incoming reports in silence. World after world.
Saved. Stabilized. Supported.
Without a single demand in return. Her assistant spoke quietly. They're helping everyone. Nerith nodded slowly. Yes. Even those who had voted against them. Even those who had celebrated their departure. Even those who had suffered because of that decision. There was no distinction. No resentment. No hesitation. Why? The assistant asked. It wasn't a political question. It was a genuine one. Because nothing in the known galaxy behaved like this. Nerith didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up footage from one of the relief zones. A human volunteer, young, exhausted, helping distribute supplies. Working without pause. Without recognition. An alien child approached her. Small.
Weak.
Frightened. Why are you helping us? The child asked. The human paused. For just a moment. Then smiled. Because you need help. That's it. The human nodded. That's enough. The footage ended. Silence filled the room. Because the answer was too simple.
Too direct.
Too impossible. In the council chamber, the debate intensified. They're doing this to make us dependent again. No. They're doing this because we're failing. Then why not take control? Why not demand authority? No one had an answer. Because control required leverage. And humans weren't using theirs. They're not trying to rule us, Nerith said finally. The chamber turned toward her. They never were.
A pause.
They were trying to help us. That realization landed harder than any accusation, because it meant everything had been misinterpreted. Every action, every decision, every assumption.
Wrong.
Meanwhile, on Earth, the debate was just as intense. We can't keep doing this, one official argued. We're pouring resources into systems that rejected us. They're dying, another replied. Are we supposed to ignore that? They made their choice. And this is ours. At the center of it all stood Elias Varn, watching, listening, carrying the weight of both sides. Finally, he spoke. We don't help because they deserve it. The room fell silent. We help because we choose to be the kind of species that does. No anger, no superiority, just clarity. If we stop now, if we let them suffer to prove a point, a pause, then we become exactly what they thought we were. No one argued after that, because deep down, they knew this wasn't strategy. This wasn't politics. This wasn't power. This was identity. And humanity had just made its choice clear. Not through words, but through action. Across the galaxy, that message spread. Faster than war. Stronger than fear. And for the first time since the collapse began, something changed. Not in the systems. Not in the governments. But in the people. Because they had seen something they couldn't explain. A species that had been rejected.
Helping anyway.
And in that moment, a new realization began to form. Quiet, powerful, unavoidable. Maybe, just maybe, they had misunderstood humanity. From the very beginning, the signal came without warning. No build-up, no early indicators, just a priority alert, broadcast across every remaining network in Council space. Stellar instability detected system. Broken reach estimated collapse, 72 hours. For a moment, no one reacted, because the scale didn't register. Then the data followed. 14 inhabited worlds. Population, 14.2 million. Evacuation window, 72 hours. Silence spread across every command center, because everyone understood what that meant. It wasn't enough time. Even at full capacity, combining every remaining fleet, every available transport, every functioning route, they could maybe save half. Maybe. Run evacuation projections, a coordinator ordered. The system processed, then displayed the result. Maximum extraction, 8.1 million estimated loss, 6.1 million. No one spoke, because the numbers were final. This wasn't a crisis that could be managed. This was a choice. Who lives? And who doesn't? The distress call reached Earth within minutes. The response was immediate. Emergency council convened. All sectors notified. Fleet readiness protocols initiated. But even then, there was hesitation. If we commit everything, one official said slowly, we leave ourselves exposed. Another added, the star could destabilize early. We could lose ships, crews. And for what? Someone else said. They're not our responsibility. The room fell silent, because that argument made sense. Logically,
Strategically.
even politically. Then Elias Barnes stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately. We've had this conversation before, he said. No one interrupted. We asked what kind of species we are. A pause. This is the answer. He looked around the room. Not one person left behind, if it's within our power. Silence. Then, one by one, heads nodded. The vote was called. Unanimous. Within minutes, orders were transmitted across human space. Every available vessel mobilized. Civilian transports, medical ships, cargo carriers, exploration craft. Everything that could fly was redirected. Within hours, the largest fleet ever assembled in human history was moving, not toward war, but toward rescue. They arrived like a wave. Thousands of ships dropping out of transit across the Broken Reach system. From orbit, it looked impossible. From the ground, it looked like hope. They came, someone whispered. They actually came. There was no time for awe. The operation began immediately. Landing zones established. Evacuation priorities assigned. Medical triage deployed. Humans moved with precision, but not alone, because this time, they weren't the only ones. Other species joined, not out of obligation, not out of command,
But because they chose to.
former enemies working side by side, loading transports, guiding civilians, holding lines. The countdown had begun. 72 hours. And every second mattered. At first, it worked. Millions evacuated within the first day. The system held. Then, at hour 49, everything changed. A solar flare erupted prematurely. Radiation surged through the outer system. 3 human ships caught in the wave. Communications lost. For a moment, the operation faltered. Rescue teams diverted. Time lost. Momentum broken. They're gone, someone said. No, Elias replied. Find them. They found 2. Damaged, but intact. The crews.
Alive.
The 3rd ship.
Was gone.
No debris. No signal. Just gone. 412 lives. Lost in seconds. The news spread through the fleet. Not as panic, but as weight. Because now, everyone understood the cost. And still, no one stopped. At hour 60, evacuation count. 13.4 million. 800,000 remaining. The star. Becoming unstable. Faster now. More violent. Fleet Command issued a recommendation. We need to withdraw.
The risk was too high.
Staying longer
Could cost everything. Ships, crews.
the entire operation. Elias listened, then gave the order. We continue. No hesitation. Until the last possible moment. Because that had been the choice. From the beginning. And it wasn't changing now. The final hours were chaos. Ships pushing beyond safe limits. Engines overheating. Navigation systems failing under radiation interference. But still, they moved. Still, they carried people. Still, they refused to stop. At hour 70, evacuation count 13.9 million, 300,000 remaining, spread across 2 distant colonies. Time almost gone. Fleet Command transmitted final warning. Star entering critical phase. Immediate withdrawal advised. Some ships began to pull back. Not all. 300 vessels held position. Volunteers. No orders. No obligation. Just a decision. They turned and headed back into the danger zone. Load everyone, one captain said. Everything we can carry. No calculations. No projections. Just action. On the surface. The final evacuation began. People ran,
Cried.
climbed aboard ships already over capacity. No one was turned away. No one left behind. At least, not by choice. The star
Collapsed.
the first shockwave, visible from orbit. A wall of light, expanding, faster than anything. Jump now, Fleet Command shouted. The ships lifted, engines burning past limits, carrying more weight than they were designed for, racing against something they could not outrun, only escape. One by one, they reached the jump point, engaged, vanished. The last ship jumped seconds before the wave hit. The system,
Gone.
all 14 worlds,
Erased.
silence. Then, the numbers came in. Final evacuation count, 14.2 million.
Saved.
Total human losses. No one spoke, because there was nothing to say. Across the galaxy, the story spread, not as propaganda, not as news, but as truth. Humans had been rejected, restricted, pushed out. And when the galaxy needed them most, they came anyway. They didn't demand apologies, didn't negotiate terms, didn't ask for recognition. They just saved everyone, at a cost. And in that moment, every species understood something they had failed to see before. Strength was not domination. It was choice. The choice to help, even when you didn't have to. And humanity had just proven exactly what kind of species it was. For a long time, the galaxy was quiet, not the silence of peace, not the silence of stability, but the kind that follows something irreversible. The wars didn't stop overnight. The systems didn't repair themselves. The damage didn't disappear. But something had changed, because after the broken reach, no one could pretend anymore. No one could deny what they had seen. Human ships, burning through radiation to save strangers. Human crews, giving their lives without hesitation. Humanity, choosing compassion over advantage. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't manipulation. It was real. And that realization spread faster than conflict ever had. Across fractured systems, something new began to form. Not alliances, not treaties, but understanding. Species that had once competed started cooperating, not because they were forced to, but because they finally understood why it mattered. The first ceasefire came quietly, then another, then more. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough. Because for the first time, they weren't waiting for someone else to fix it. They were trying to fix it themselves. Months passed, then a year. The council, what remained of it, gathered again. Not at the old nexus. That symbol had been lost, but on a neutral world. No strategic value, no hidden advantage, just ground to start over. The chamber was smaller, simpler, but it felt more honest, because this time, there were no illusions. Every species present knew exactly what had been lost. and what it had cost. Counselor Nerith stood at the center, no longer just an analyst, no longer just an observer. Now, a voice. She activated the chamber display. Resolution 9912, the one that had started everything, the one that had pushed humanity away.
Repeal, she said.
The vote began. One by one, lights appeared. Not hesitation, not doubt, just decision. Unanimous. The resolution was gone. But that wasn't enough. Nerith took a breath, then spoke again. This council was built on the idea of unity. A pause. We believed we understood what that meant. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried weight. We were wrong. The chamber was silent, because no one disagreed. We mistook support for control. We mistook kindness for strategy. We mistook partnership for weakness. Each word landed heavier than the last. And because of that,
She paused.
we lost the one species that was holding everything together. No one looked away, because they all felt it, the truth. We cannot undo what we've done, she continued. We cannot erase the consequences. Images appeared behind her. Broken systems, fallen worlds, the names of the 412. We cannot repay this debt. A long silence. Then, her voice softened. But we can choose what comes next. She turned toward the chamber. Not dependence. Not fear. Partnership. Not the kind they had before, but something real. Something earned. A message was prepared. Not a demand. Not a negotiation. An invitation. It was sent to Earth. Simple.
Direct.
We understand now. We were wrong. We do not ask you to return. A pause. We ask for the chance to stand beside you. The response took time. Not hours. Not days.
Weeks.
Because this time, humanity didn't rush. They had learned, too. When the message finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No grand declaration. No overwhelming presence. Just a single transmission. From Elias Barn. Displayed across the chamber. You don't need us to stand. A pause. You've proven that. The room held its breath. We will not rebuild what was lost. We will not carry what you can carry yourselves. Another pause.
But
The word echoed. We will stand with you. Something shifted in the room. Not relief. Not victory. Something deeper. Respect.
real.
Mutual. The terms were simple. No hidden support systems. No silent intervention. No invisible safety nets. Equal contribution. Shared responsibility. Honest cooperation. Nothing more. Nothing less. This time, everyone agreed. Not because they had to, but because they understood. The new council charter was signed that day, not as a return to what had been, but as the beginning of something different. Something stronger. Something real. Human ships returned to council space, but not as silent guardians. As partners, working alongside others. Not above them. Not beneath them. With them. Years later, the story of the Broken Reach was still told. Not as tragedy, but as a turning point. A moment when the galaxy learned what strength actually meant. Not power. Not control. But choice. The choice to help, even when you don't have to. On a small world once saved during the evacuation, a young doctor stood in a quiet medical center. On the wall behind her, a memorial. 412 names. She looked them often, not with sadness, but with purpose. Because she had been there. She had been one of the millions saved. And now, she helped others. Not because she was told to, not because she had to, but because
She chose to, just like they did.
And somewhere beyond the stars, human ships continued their journey, not as rulers, not as saviors, but as something far more powerful, a species that had proven that the greatest strength in the galaxy wasn't the ability to take, but the decision
To give.
even when it cost everything.